We are following breaking news out of Colorado, where prosecutors just announced charges against police officers and paramedics involved in the death of Elijah McClain 2 years ago. A grand jury has issued a 32-count indictment against 2 current Aurora Police Department officers, a former officer, and 2 Aurora fire paramedics. The charges include manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, and second-degree assault.
Make no mistake, we recognize that this case will be difficult to prosecute. These types of cases always are. Our goal is to seek justice for Elijah McClain, for his family and friends, and for our state. In so doing, we advance the rule of law and the commitment that everyone is accountable and equal under the law.
McClain died after he was stopped by 3 Aurora police officers in 2019 as he walked home from a convenience store. The officers first tackled McClain, then put him in a hold while paramedics administered ketamine to sedate him. The 23-year-old was declared brain dead at the hospital and was removed from life support 3 days later. Joining us now are Georgetown University law professor and former federal prosecutor Paul Butler and civil rights attorney and former federal prosecutor David Henderson. And David, we'll start with you because the DA said that they didn't find enough evidence to prove that the officers violated Colorado law in connection with McClain's death. But then the governor gave it to the AG, and now we've got charges. How did all of this unfold?
Well, Geoff, I think this is simply a matter of perspective in terms of whether or not they're willing to participate in an equitable investigation. And let's put it this way. The police have the right to approach you the same way a normal citizen would approach you. They can walk up to you and start asking questions the same way a normal citizen would. The problem is that when they operate beyond the law and get physical with you when they have no legal right to do so, they typically are not held accountable. In order to stop him and detain him, they needed reasonable suspicion that he was involved in criminal activity. They did not have that. Then they proceeded to kill a young man who went to the corner store. They should be held accountable the same way any other private citizen would be, since they were operating outside the law. And I think the current prosecutor investigating the case understood that.
And Paul, each of the 5 defendants face 1 count of manslaughter and 1 count of criminally negligent homicide. What does that mean in plain English? And what's sort of the legal burden?
Geoff, the first officer who responded put his hands on Mr. McClain 10 seconds after he left his patrol car. After the officers beat Mr. McClain up for no reason, one threatened to call a police dog, all while Mr. McClain was not resisting. For manslaughter, just as in the Derek Chauvin case, the court will have to prove that the officers caused Mr. McClain's death, and just as Derek Chauvin tried to make it sound like Mr. Floyd killed himself or is responsible for his own death, they'll say that here. But the evidence of recklessness is overwhelming. And I should say it's not overwhelming from the video because the officers claim that their video cameras fell off during this encounter. We really must have, in all of these officer-involved cases, independent investigations. The city council investigation found that the cops tried to cover this up. They didn't ask basic questions when they were investigating this. And the only reason these charges happened is because activists pressured the governor of Colorado to appoint a special prosecutor.
And David Henderson, one of the things that's so particular about this case is, as you mentioned, based on everything we know about it, there was no reason for Elijah McClain to have been stopped in the first place. Somebody saw him walking at night. He had a ski mask on. He said he was cold. It was Colorado. And he said he was anemic, and that's why he had a ski mask on. And then he was set upon by police and was drugged by paramedics. They gave him 500 milligrams of this powerful sedative. This kid was 5'6", weighed 140 pounds, and they gave him enough sedative that you would give to somebody who weighs 220 pounds. And his final words are haunting and tragic. He says, God. He says, I can't breathe. He says, I can't breathe. I have my ID right here. My name is Elijah McClain. That's my house. I was just going home. I'm an introvert. I'm just different. That's all. I'm so sorry. I have no gun. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting. Why are you attacking me? If Elijah McClain isn't safe, who is? Who is David Henderson, Paul Butler? Who's safe? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, that's why we're here. And I appreciate you drawing attention to what's important about this case. And that is, number one, do any of us want to live in a world where young people can't go to the convenience store and make it back home when they're not committing a crime and they're not doing anything wrong? Number two, what does it mean when the people who are supposed to protect us are the most quick to resort to violence, even lethal violence? Not only did they kill him, but some of the officers who killed him went back a year later and took photographs at his memorial site, mocking the manner in which he died. And as you just explained, there was a complete lack of compassion with regard to how the people who say they're there to keep us safe treated someone who wasn't a threat to anyone's safety. They killed a young man because he was different, and when he told them so, they wouldn't stop to listen. They choked him and drugged him to death.
Paul Butler, in the time that we have in this hour, I just want to get your final thoughts here.
Two of these officers who were charged today are still sworn officers. Geoff, that means that you or David and I would not be safe on the streets of Aurora, Colorado. There must be accountability, and we can't depend on the states. The United States Justice Department has to continue to step up to demand transparency and accounting and policing, none of which we saw in the Aurora local police department.
Paul Butler and David Henderson, I appreciate you two brothers more than you know. Thank you so much for joining me.